Hello and welcome to your next lesson of the ecology booklet. This lesson is about what we call biodiversity and how we maintain it. But to start with, we're going to do 5 questions to recap your last lesson, which was on deforestation. Okay, so here are your 5 questions. What you need to do is pause this video, answer those 5 questions in your book or on paper, and then replay the video and I'll go through the answers. Okay, so please press pause now. Right, so hopefully you paused, answered the questions and are ready for the answers. Right, so number 1, what deforestation is. So deforestation is basically just the removal of large areas of forest. That's what it is. Number 2 reasons why it happens. There are lots of reasons, but these are the main ones, and you only needed 2. So you could have had cattle ranching, so taking down forests for cattle ranching, growing crops, so for food, or growing crops for biofuel, clearing way for rice fields. That's a lot of space that's needed for rice fields, and for also growing palm oil. Okay, number 3. Name 1 greenhouse gas. You could have had methane or carbon dioxide or even water vapour, but they're the main ones. Number 4, which gas does the destruction of peat bogs release? That would be carbon dioxide or CO2. And then number 5, name 1 place where deforestation happens. So you could have had the Amazon rainforest or Southeast Asia. Right, so we're going to look at something called biodiversity today. So here are some new definitions for you. You may have come across some of them before. What you need to do is pause the video, add any of the keywords that you don't know into your glossary. If you know them all, which would be amazing, you don't need to add them. If you know some, you only need to add the ones you don't know right now. If you know it, you don't need to write it. Okay, so pause and do that. Lovely. So hopefully you paused and you've now added all the keywords that you're not sure about into your glossary, so you've got a record of them for future use. So let's get on with today's lesson, which is all about biodiversity. So what actually is biodiversity? So let's have a look at these 2 pictures. The Arctic. Okay, the Arctic is a cold area that has 5,500 different species living there. Okay, so sounds like a lot, yeah? But then we look at the rainforest, okay, and actually the rainforest has 10 million species living there. Different species, and you can see by the pictures on this PowerPoint, you can only see 1 polar bear in that one, and in the rainforest you can see loads of different species of animals and plants, and those pictures represent what it's really like. That actually in the rainforest there are loads of different species of animals. You can even see here you've got 2 different species of parrots in that photo alone. There are loads, well, 10 million different species of animals and plants in the rainforest. And we say that the rainforest has a high biodiversity, and we say that the Arctic has a low biodiversity. So biodiversity means how many different species there are living in an ecosystem or on Earth. Okay, so we're looking at this as a really important thing today. Biodiversity is essential to life on Earth, and we're going to next talk about why that is. Okay, before we get onto that, what I'd like you to do is just recap what we've done so far. So 2 questions. Which ecosystem is more biodiverse, the Arctic or the rainforest, and how do you know? And which sentence, choose A, B or C, best describes biodiversity? Okay, I'm going to give you 60 seconds for that one. Off you go. You will have to pause the video. Right, so lovely. Hopefully you paused the video and you've answered those 2 questions. So let's go with the first one. Which ecosystem is more biodiverse? The rainforest. How do you know? There are more different types of species. And then which sentence best describes biodiversity? is C, how many different species there are in an ecosystem. Okay, lovely. So like I said, we're now going to move on to talk about why biodiversity is so important. So we're going to start by looking at the Arctic food web as an example. So the habitat or the ecosystem of the Arctic that we looked at, where the polar bear was on his own in that photo. This is a simplified version of the Arctic food web. So you've got only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 different living organisms in this food web. Obviously there are lots more than that in the Arctic, but this is simplified. Now the thing I want to talk to you first of all about is I've put this here. So organisms in an ecosystem depend on each other for lots of different things. The main three things are food, shelter, and maintaining the environment. By maintaining the environment, I mean things like it's essential to have plants so that they release oxygen, so you've got oxygen in your environment. So that's the sort of thing we're talking about when we talk about that. So let's look at the food web of the Arctic. Now, if we use the example, I shall just get a pen up here. If we use an example of the Arctic bird here, you can see the Arctic bird eats Arctic cod. Okay, now there's no other arrows pointing to the Arctic bird, so that's the only animal that the Arctic bird eats in this example. Now because of that, what would happen if all the Arctic cod died out? Overfishing by humans or a disease hits the Arctic cod and they no longer exist, or their numbers drop ridiculously low. What are the Arctic birds going to do? There's no backup. Now, because the Arctic has a low biodiversity, there's less chance for the animals or the plants to adapt to new changes. So we say that it is unstable. Okay, it's an unstable ecosystem because it has low biodiversity. There was no backup for those Arctic birds. Now let's look at the converse and look at the lovely rainforest, and I'm going to use this monkey as an example. This is again a very simplified version. Okay, so if we look at this monkey, we can see that he eats bamboo, banana trees, fruits and coconut trees. So that's 4 things he eats. So for example, if banana trees all died out because of a disease or because humans destroyed them all or something like that, he has 3 other options. He's got 3 backups. So because the rainforest has a rich biodiversity, lots of different species live there, the monkey was able to still survive. Obviously there would be impact on other things there, but generally it can survive. And that means it is stable. So if you've got a higher biodiversity, there's a bigger variety of living things, so the ecosystem is more stable. Okay, so that's the key here. The more living things, the more stable. You've got backups. So what I would like you to do is, just to recap that, is finish this sentence using the keywords in purple. It says an ecosystem with a higher biodiversity is more stable because, and I'd like you to try and use the words variety, depend, food, shelter and environment. 60 seconds, pause this video, off you go. Okay, hopefully you paused the video and you've had a go at answering that or finishing that sentence. So here's the example I wrote. If it's not exactly the same, it's okay, but as long as you've got the gist. So I've said an ecosystem with a lower biodiversity is less stable because organisms may depend on a variety of organisms for food, shelter and environment. So they have a backup. So if one organism was to die out, there would be other options. Lovely. So it's good to have a high biodiversity so the ecosystem is stable. So that's what biodiversity is. We're now going to look at maintaining it, making sure that the Earth as a whole has a high biodiversity. And there are reasons why it doesn't always. And it's usually because of us, because of humans. Now, there are four main reasons that humans are affecting the biodiversity of this earth. Now, some of them you've looked at already. So you've looked at deforestation and peat bog destruction already with Mr. Phillips. And some of them you're going to come on to. So global warming and pollution, I think you've got lessons coming up on those. So all four of these things have an effect on biodiversity. Some of them destroy habitats, so the animals can't live there anymore, so therefore the animals die out. Global warming, the earth or the climate is getting hotter, so certain living things can't adapt to that and are not going to survive, reducing the amount of different species we've got. And pollution has a massive range of impacts across the globe on biodiversity. And what we're going to look at is maintaining it. Okay, so what we do as humans is reduce biodiversity by what we do to the planet. But what we are trying to do is conserve that. We put conservation programs in place which help to pick up biodiversity. Okay, so have a think about this next thing. I want you to see if you can remember the four ways we are impacting biodiversity, those four things, and what I mean by conservation. Do you know what conservation is? Have a think. 60 seconds, pause this video, and then off you go. Lovely. So hopefully you've had a go at answering those questions. And here are the answers. So the four ways that we impact biodiversity is deforestation, global warming, pollution and destroying peat bogs. And conservation is the preservation of an ecosystem and the organisms that live in them. Okay, so really good if you got number 2 right, because I hadn't gone over that. I wanted to see if you knew it. So let's have a look at how we conserve biodiversity. There are 4 ways we're going to look at. There are 4 main ways that humans can try and pick up or maintain the biodiversity to stop it dropping down. So number 1, what have we got here? We have got 4 living organisms, 4 animals that these are actually endangered. Now, endangered is when a species are very low in numbers. So we've got the white rhino, we've got tigers, we've got orangutans, and we've got pandas. Now, tigers and rhinos have reduced so much in numbers because of 2 things. The main one is the habitat. So most of what we do is destroy habitats for farming, etc. And so their homes have been destroyed, so their numbers have declined radically. The other thing that we do to these poor animals is we poach them. So tigers are believed to have healing properties, their meat and things like that, so people poach them for that, and also their fur is beautiful, so people poach them for their fur. And rhinos for their horns. Again, people believe that their horns are nice for decoration, but a lot of the time it's because they believe they have healing properties and they put their horns or ivory in medicine. So those poor animals are very, very low in numbers because of it. And then the bottom 2, you've got orangutan, which is this one, hopefully you know the difference between the 2, and pandas, and they are both reducing in numbers drastically because their habitats are being destroyed. Orangutans, it's been in the news relatively recently, their habitats are being massively destroyed because of palm oil farming. So we're farming palm oil. And then the pandas, we destroy, or China are destroying their habitats. So they've got no food, they've got no shelter, and so their numbers reduce. So what do we do about it? What we do is we set up things called breeding programs. And what that means is in captivity usually, zoos or areas of captivity can try and breed these endangered species in their zoos. And hopefully the idea is that you'll breed an animal. So for example, if you're breeding a tiger, you might send off your male tiger to another zoo that has a female tiger. Hopefully they will breed and have some tiger cubs. The idea is to then release those cubs into the wild. That doesn't always happen, and what you find is you've just got some tigers living in zoos, and therefore even if the wild tigers completely die out, there are still tigers on Earth in zoos, but that's not ideal. We would like them to be free and in zoos, in the wild. So the main idea after breeding them is to try and release them. But being born in a captivity doesn't always mean that they're going to be ready. So there are pros and cons here, but the idea is that you're breeding in captivity so you can reintroduce them to the wild to increase the population. Right, so that's one way that we can maintain biodiversity. The next way is to do with fields. So this is very appropriate to the UK. You may have noticed, without realising you've noticed, but if you see a large field, usually around the outside is an area of hedge called a hedgerow, or you've just got a field margin. So what happens is the edge between two fields, what farmers do is they leave it to be a bit more wild, so they don't include it in their field, or they plant hedges in between it, and it's to help increase biodiversity. So if I'm growing a crop of, let's say, potatoes, I'm clearing a massive area that could have had lots of different species of animals and had a really high biodiversity. But I'm clearing that, and all I'm doing is I'm planting potatoes. So first of all, I'm reducing the amount of living things that live there drastically in the first instance. So if I then, between my fields, add a hedgerow or let it grow wild between my fields, then I've allowed a section of the area that I own to become highly biodiverse, or more biodiverse than the field itself. So what you find is these hedges can grow lots and lots of different insects, small mammals, small animals, and lots and lots of plants. So that's what field margins and hedgerows are for, if you've ever wondered. They're not just to look pretty. And the third way that we maintain biodiversity is through government programmes. So the governments, you've already looked at this in your lesson with Mr. Phillips, they put up programmes to help stop deforestation, so protect certain areas. They also have programmes where they try and reduce the carbon dioxide emissions. But one of the main things that governments can put in place is a recycling programme. Now, Portsmouth has got quite a good one. We've got recycling bins that you put your recyclables in. Now, why does this help maintain biodiversity? Well, let's think about if we didn't recycle, if everything we binned went into these beautiful landfills sites that you can see in these pictures. Once upon a time, this land would have been used by living things, different organisms, to live. Now, what we've done is we've destroyed that and we've added our rubbish to it. So we are reducing the habitats of those living things and therefore reducing biodiversity. So if we recycle, we are then going to reduce how much space we need for the landfills, and that's essentially it. Okay, and the last way that we're going to look at, that was recycling programs, is called protection and regeneration of habitats. Now there are 4 habitats here, and these are all quite rare habitats, okay? So it's really important to make sure that they are protected. Now, a rare habitat can be destroyed quite easily by us, usually, and it has a massive effect on the animals and plants that live there. So coral reef, you've looked at this in previous lessons, is an area where algae and little polyps grow into beautiful structures that you can see here, and it's beautifully highly diverse. It has lots of fish, larger animals that live there, lots of different living things live in coral reefs. It's a beautiful area, but they are under threat. And we'll look at how we can improve that in a second. This one here that my face is covering at the moment is called a mangrove. Now, a mangrove is an area where you've got salt water, and a woodland or a shrub area forms in the salt water, and it's it's a gorgeous area. You get all sorts of animals that live there, very biodiverse if you let it be. Then you've got wetland, which is an area of land and wet, so watery land basically, and heathland, which is a shrub area that grows in acidic soil, so soil usually that nothing would like to grow on. It's quite acidic, it's not very nice, but certain living things do grow there and certain animals therefore live there. So those animals would not be around if we got rid of all the heathlands. So what can we do about protecting these 4 areas? Because they're all lovely and people like to visit them, they do get destroyed. But if we protect them and we, have a section of the wetland or a section of the heathland that no one can go, no one can destroy, then we'll protect that area. And that's what these programmes do. They protect sections. If we think about wetland as a particular example, previously what has happened to wetlands is they've been drained so that fields can be built there for growing crops for us. And obviously that's reduced the amount of wetland and reduced the biodiversity of those wetlands. But recently what they've been doing is pumping water back into the wetlands and then sealing it off, and people aren't allowed to go there, or people aren't allowed to interfere any longer with it, so that the animals and the plants can grow and the biodiversity can increase. Coral reef is another area where people love to go to a huge tourist attraction, and it does affect them quite drastically, but they are protecting them more. They've got programs to stop people doing that. So there are lots of things you can do, but the main idea is you're sectioning off an area that people cannot go, or there are really strict rules about what you can do there, and it protects the animals and plants. Right, so I did do a lot of talking there, and that's the 4 ways that we can maintain biodiversity. So here are 4 questions. It says 60 seconds, but I think that's a little harsh. I'm going to give you 3 minutes to do this. Okay, so pause the video, time for 3 minutes, and answer the questions. Off you go. Right, so hopefully you've had a go, you've given yourself 3 minutes. Let's go through the answers. So what can be done to increase numbers of endangered species? The answer would be breeding programs. Why will recycling help increase biodiversity? Because it reduces landfill waste and therefore less habitats are destroyed. Number 3, what do farmers sometimes plant around the edges of their fields to increase biodiversity? Hedgerows or hedges. And then number 4, name one type of habitat that needs protecting. You could have had coral reef, heathland, wetland or mangrove. Right, lovely. So we have actually come to the end of this lesson, all about biodiversity and how we maintain it. And there are 3 choices of tasks you can do now. So the first choice is this one. Just tell me what biodiversity is, write that in your book. And then match up. In yellow we have the 4 issues there are, and then in green you've got the 4 solutions. So match up which issue matches which solution. So the first issue is biodiversity is reduced due to extensive spread of farmland. What is the solution for that? So you just match it up. That's choice 1. Choice 2 is why is it important to have biodiversity? So a little bit more of a tricky question. And then I want you to look at the 4 issues and you're going to describe a solution yourself based on this lesson. So you're not matching them up, you're describing it yourself. So it's a little bit harder, but a bit more challenging and maybe a bit more exciting for you. And then the last thing is choice 3 is write a letter to Boris Johnson explaining why biodiversity is so important and what he can do to try and maintain it. I mean, he's got quite a lot on his plate at the moment, but I think we can add to it. It is his job. So write a letter to him. What is biodiversity? Tell him. I don't think he knows. He doesn't get why it's important. So tell him. And then what we can do. Give him some ideas. What can we do? And how do they work? All right. So that's kind of like an essay about what we've just talked about. So there are your 3 tasks. It's been lovely to talk to you. I hope you enjoyed the lesson and I hope you enjoy the activities. Good luck and send the completed work to your teachers. Lovely job.